performing 9 months pregnant with her belly, so I still perform today in the same skins that I was performing back all those years ago. So Pakanakana Plila we pride ourselves on reviving and restoring traditional practices here from our ancestors through song and dance. And over the years it has evolved. It began purely for community and to pass knowledge on and to have community members engage in traditional and cultural practices. The last 10 years or so, it's broadened to creating resources and opportunities for the broader community, right across the island, right across the nation, and in recent years, globally, facilitating cultural exchange programs. It all began to revive language through song and dance, and without realising, creating opportunities and spaces for not only connection, understanding and knowledge sharing, but also ceremony. And in these strange times that we find ourselves, many of the conversations that I'm offering around my practice, so it actually has nothing to do with performing song and dance when we're offering to the broader public. It's about creating a space for acknowledgement of place and our ancestors, but also your ancestors or those ancestors that are invited to share or be connected. So I'm forever finding myself creating those environments for connection, for learning, for engagement, building bridges between communities. And it's interesting, a lot of people are aware of the workspace that I might create, and then when it comes to the time, it's an offering of something completely different. So ceremony for us would be connecting to country, going on country, gathering on country resources, smoking ceremony for a release of energy, but also those that visit the island, we offer safety. And in these times, the word ceremony, for those that are yearning to have that connection and to get out and really yearning and feeling like they're needing it for them, for their being, for their mental health, for their mind, it moves into your personal ceremonies. So ceremony is not an Indigenous practice. It's not only an Indigenous thing. And I'm sure most of you are all aware of this. You know, it's the basic of brushing your teeth every morning and making your bed. That is one of your personal ceremonies. And moving into practice, I'm a very, 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 very positive person. I'm an optimist. So even throughout all of these times, I have seen the shining light in so many aspects. And it's easy for me to say and for us to say, we live on this magical island, you know, and it is such a traumatic time around the globe for many, but there is many positive and beneficial things that will come out of this. And in regards to our practice, I am the manager and project manager for Pakanakana Plila. So we have performances and workshops statewide, and also a lot of international projects that are now, as everybody else, put on hold. I'm not friends with technology whatsoever. So I am a woman that's always lived in very small towns. I choose to do that. The work that I have to do across the island and stepping into those spaces, I've always loved going back to my quiet little sanctuary by the beach or wherever it may have been. And now I live in Hobart. And so my ceremonies that I'm going through or have been in this space in these past few weeks is simply acknowledgement. So I will sit and take my body I'm a big believer in the conscious and unconscious state, and I talk a lot about the power of thought and the frequencies that emits. And not only the speech, every act, everything that we say and do creates who we are, also our thoughts hold great power around that as well. And so simply by acknowledging your body and the present and where it may be, but also practicing and acknowledging, for me personally, country. So I will take myself there unconsciously and acknowledge my country. And so that's been my practice throughout this space in regards to something that would be a regular thing. There's times throughout the year where I'm wearing skins and ochre more than I am clothes, especially at the beginning of the year, NAIDOC week and a couple of other weeks throughout the year. But so it's a different space just to be in four walls for somebody that, you know, is connected to country and always outdoors. So that was my way of reshifting that process and that component of my practice. But I am also an independent dancer, and it's been strange to have technology forced upon me when, as I said, I'm very old school. I still write letters, I still have my notebook. I'm not up to date with technology whatsoever. I have my 13-year-old son is my in-house technician, so if I have any issues, I'll just call Noah and he syncs everything and puts it all together for me. But being my practice what it is, and even my solo work, my independent work, still has cultural elements attached to it. And so in the last 2 months, I've found myself being asked to have offerings or create presentations and components that fit in certain platforms. And it's interesting, there is so much content that does not fit an offering such as this. You know, I know I can see all your faces and I'm aware and have a connection to some of you, but those that don't, I'm just a voice on the screen. And so it's interesting to choose not to allow and be pushed in these times. So many of us as artists have gone through the wave of emotions to stay productive or to have offerings or needing to, you know, do, whereas it's okay, also it's okay not to feel like you have to put yourself out there. It's okay that you don't have to create online presence to a degree. This is me personally going into that space. And at the same time, I actually am. So there's resources that I'm working with pre-little learners, so an offering and they will be responding. There's a high school program that I'm working with that's very similar, and it all stems around country and understanding the word country and the philosophies to us as first, you know, Indigenous peoples. So it's been interesting to have that war with myself, knowing that my practice, to a degree, I will not allow to shift to an online space, but I've had to really take small components and create offerings. So it's been an interesting process. And as I said, I'm a very positive person. Throughout these times, I'd like to think for everybody, whatever forms they are, there are small wins, there are wins, and then there are massive wins. And it's not always about having to be productive to get that acknowledgement of achievement or a win. But in the last 3 weeks, I've been fortunate enough, with everybody else going through the similar process and similar unfortunate times, has allowed me to focus on my practice, whereas I actually wouldn't. I would be working with the many hats that we do and dedicating our energy and time to that particular role or that particular job. Whereas these times have allowed us to shatter our practice and reinvestigate them, investigate our practice and reinvent them in some form. As I said, whether you choose to use whatever tools that are there, but it's been extremely interesting. have spent the last 3 weeks solely working on my project that is very fortunate to be funded by the Australia Council, and also will be programmed through 2021. And I have provocateurs from around the country that have been working with me in development on the screen in the hall. And I do apologise that I can't stay today, because I'm literally be packing up my computer from my room. You're actually in my bedroom in my house. And I'm taking it to the hall. So it's interesting how as I mentioned, somebody that is not tech savvy, somebody that does not like to be on this space, but yet, you know, there's a degree where we have to obviously allow ourselves to shift and to utilise the tools. But yes, it's been very interesting to have the provocateurs, the extraordinary provocateurs that have come on board with me. Marilyn Miller, which is known as, you know, an absolute queen of the dance world across the nation, and Kate Champion, which is an extraordinary director. And if these strange times had not occurred, there is no way that they would be available to work with me. So yeah, small wins and massive wins. I've allowed myself to shift. I've allowed myself to reinvent the practice and not be torn. And then I speak of being kind to yourself and to take those small ceremonies daily. It's so easy to say, but it's also so easy to forget. So I'm having to remind myself. And for somebody that's doesn't always listen to the noise, I found myself going down the dark screen only on Friday, for example, and we are so far in this, I should be taking more care of myself. On Friday, I sat in this computer chair from 10:30, and my last back-to-back finished at 4:30 that day. As Simon said, I appreciated, you know, we get up, you walk around in these sessions, you know, I should have known better to be more kind to myself and to acknowledge and, you know, hold space for my ceremonies that I would usually do, which is just sitting out on my deck, the most simplest things. So there's so many shifts and changes that we're all going through. But it's interesting, I do regret that I'm not available to stay for the afternoon session. Great things come from deep pain. Extraordinary, beautiful things come from... Excuse me. Aren't you going to work, Mum? Yes, darling. I'm sharing some slides on the screen. But I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been extraordinary times. And as I was saying, you know, great things come from being completely shattered and broken and then putting it back together and rebuilding. So that's what I see this time for us as artists and our practice being. And we live in an extraordinary place, not only Lutruwita, but Australia. There are so many opportunities and we are extremely fortunate. And, you know, to be reminded of Palestine, you know, the things that are happening globally and have been for so many years, and this may be something that we're going through at the moment, but I think it might just be me because I'm an extreme optimist, but it's to remind ourselves. And going back to one of the sessions for those of you that were here and those of you that weren't, really practicing just being. So being in your practice, delving deep, reinventing it, like exploring it, whether you're a painter or extraordinary woman like Bella. She's extreme. You inspire me. You honestly do. I've watched you over the years, and to see your beautiful face this morning was a huge smile. But thank you all for listening to me. Nothing was really prepared. I wanted to just share what it is that I do and the process that I've gone through in the last few weeks. I am, as you can see, I am a mother of 2 beautiful teenagers. So juggling all of this and caring, I also have my mother that's been here with me in ISO, and my uncle that's going on for quite some time now. They live in a small town in 3 hours away in St Helens, and it was just a little bit of a worry to think that mum wouldn't be able to get to the supermarket as everybody else with family. So we've been together, going insane together is what I'm saying. Actually staying insane together, I shift that around a little bit. I like that, I like to think that I'm happily and magically insane and like to stay that way. But thank you all once again, Simon. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you for that intro to the day. Have a good day. Has anybody got any, is there any time for a quick question or anything around that? Or I don't know if that's, we'll have time.
I didn't really offer anything, did
Thanks, Cinsa.
Just thanks for coming.
Thanks, Cinsa.
Thanks, Cinsa. All right, I'm gonna just share my bit of practice here. I'm gonna do a share screen just for 15 minutes of my experience. This screen here. You can all still hear me? Are you all hearing me still? Yes, good. So you can see this image of me here. This is in Bundanon in New South Wales, and I'm just going to tell you the story of the work that basically I made after our daughter died. Our daughter died in an accident in 2012. So that covers mourning loss and trauma, really. About 4 months after she died, I had already plugged in to do a residency up at Bundanon in New South Wales. And I remember very well getting in that car and driving up and stopping after about an hour, just thinking, I can't do this. This was for 3 months after she died. I was going to be on my own for 2 weeks making work. I got back in the car and I pressed on and I went and I got there, and in that 2 weeks I produced an extraordinary amount of work, a huge volume of work. That picture there is actually a second visit to Bundanon when the work carried on. And really I have been making this work almost for the first few years daily, almost as a kind of ceremony in a funny kind of way. I did it every day. And I used myself and made images of myself using iPad, and I'll run through some of them. And these are early paintings pretty well every day. This was one of the very first images in Sydney. It's not very big on there, sorry. Maybe I can make it a bit bigger. That would be better. There we go. These are prints and digital prints, but that one is called The Rising. So there's me, I don't think I need to explain it really, but myself at 4 months after my daughter died. So all the work since then pretty well has been focused on me. And what's interesting I found about this work, there's a book I made in Bundanon, is that none of it includes Scarlett at all. All of it was about me, and most of it included my family. And so those black and white elements you can see on some of those drawings are actually my father's face, which are overlaid on my face, or my brother's. And one of the very early images I did in the first week, or I was up there, I think, was this one, which is my family. you know, there's me in the middle, and then my mother's eyes, the pale brown ones, and my father's eyes, the black and white ones, down to, as I'm looking at this, to my right, and the two figures in the background are my two brothers. So, you know, why did I start after losing my daughter to revisit my past? Well, as part of my PhD, one of the first things I read is that's what you do. You go back and you recalibrate your life and you rebuild your life. And over those, what is it now, 7 years, I've just made thousands of images, and they're in these books here, which I, having one's coming back now from the printer, so I'm still making them, using iPad here and just making regular images of myself. There's one, it's my grandfather's face, and the other face with the word lion on, that's me and my father. And in the background there are 6 half hard-boiled eggs, because my father used to tell me a story of when he was a kid. They were so poor, they used to have just half a hard-boiled egg each for dinner, and the eldest was able to pick the biggest. So there's my father, and I've called that a lineage, using other bits of figures and putting them together. And I suppose one of the things I was thinking about with this work is about time, and how these are maybe not reconstructions of me. And I called this work Revisitings, which is my cultural heritage in a way, is the English Romantics. And the Revisitings is a term that Wordsworth uses about going back and looking at his previous life. So I then sort of really started to wonder if I wasn't at these moments in my childhood as I am now all the time. They're actually revisitings. They're not just looking back. Perhaps I was actually there, but I didn't see myself now. So I'm really starting to think about how time operates in some of these. These images then moved on to be much more, these are some of the general ones, very specific. Using, oh, there's my father. That was the shocking moment when I dropped my father's face on top of mine from some old photos I had. It was, oh my God, there he is. And an important person in my life, really. So then these figures, these which are much more formal, I suppose, really appeared. These appeared in the last couple of years, all made during iPad. That's me on the donkey when I was 5, in the background. I luckily had some images. They're my eyes now, looking back at me in a mall in Brisbane. They're completely constructed. So this shadow down here is drawn in. Who is this figure? That's me making them. I'm going to run on to a few of the others. There's another one. They're my brothers in the background in the house I was brought up in. Me in the foreground. And this was a series of some that I put in the PhD document. This is my doco that I did. So there's one, the one with me straining at the table, that's me in the background as an art student. So all of these, my father with 2 holes in the door, oh my God, looking through. There's my mother and my father with their faces turned around. So they've got each other's face. That's me clearly trying to escape, I think, from them in the middle. And that is actually, I went back to England and rephotographed all the places I went to as a child. So that is my house I was brought up in from around 7 to 12-year-old. So yeah, I went back and I took pictures of various different places that were important to me. I'll skip by that one. And this one, I suppose, is the most obvious one around death. That's, yeah, what do I need to say about that? 4 of us there, and 1 figure is on the table from a print. So it's, yeah, they're pulled together from various places. They're all digital, so they can go to any size. That's a bit of a joke about Gilbert and George, but there is my father trying to get me to read something. And yeah, no, I'm not happy. My brothers, when I was very little, made me a wooden batarang, which, if you didn't know, Batman used to have this thing you could throw. And so there's Batman, only it's me under the mask there with my brothers behind, who made me this batarang. And, you know, so they're all elements from my childhood brought together. One of my father there with the me as my brothers. So there's a huge intermixing. And in the books, I did a kind of analysis of how many of them were with let me show this one. How many of them have my brothers in? How many with my father? I did this kind of analysis. This one I think is quite an important one. This was a little alley that I went through as a child to school. Used to buy my sweets and and lollies and comic and things in the little shop on the corner, that alley. So I went back there and rephotographed that. And then this was an image of my brother now, his legs in a mirror, which I took in. And so they are mirrored to one another. And my brothers, if you hadn't got this already, are identical twins. So that's an important part of this. So there they are then holding up images of themselves as children. But that's me holding them, and that's my face now on those. So they are complete compilations and constructions and revisitings. And I'm kind of obsessively making them still, really, as a couple more just to show. This one perhaps is less, less obviously the history. I'm just trying to get another one. I'll show you this one. Yeah, there's me holding my mother and my father, and my brothers were scouts, so there they are out there on a limb, which is what they always were, and me somehow supporting them. So in the PhD, I didn't go into analysis of each of these images. It was a practice-based PhD. I just made them. And I made them and I made them and I made them. And as I say, I'm still making them. They're my response to that loss. And at some point, whether I start using images of Scarlett in them, I don't know. I have no inclination to do that at the moment. From all my reading, the very first thing you do is reconstruct yourself. And I think I'm probably still trying to do that and rebuild myself. And look at the losses I had, other losses in my past of my family and my brothers, not particularly their death, but I think probably more just dysfunctional, the loss of the family there. Yeah, I'm feeling I'm not quite sure what more to say about them really. There's so much that I wrote about with them, but that's probably enough to show you how I personally have used my practice, and this is one form of it, to kind of quite obsessively, really, and without any purpose often of making the drawings, but Victoria will account for it, that I would sit there an evening. Most of these are made in one go over, say, 2 or 3 hours, and I would just sit there and make the image, and the next day I make another one. And that's why I've now got over 1,000 of these images pretty much made of me, and they're still coming. So I think that might be all I'm going to say. Yeah, you can see the books. There are masses of these books. Yeah. They're just full of those images. And those revisiting ones, I think, are particularly, particularly. I have kind of selected some out that I think particularly point to it. That's quite a scary one. Interesting story. That's my parents as my children. The ghosts. That's my house, me up in the house I lived in as a kid. So this has been my response to, one of my responses to losing Scarlett. And I think one of the other issues that I can identify in the PhD was there was a difference to the loss to the trauma. And I think, to a large extent, the images are more about the trauma for me of the loss rather than the loss. And it took me a couple of years to pull those things apart in my mind, really, that these actually are all about me. And because that's what I can do, and how I use my practice. But I make a point in my PhD, had I not had my practice, I don't know. It's a thing one always goes back to, isn't it? As an artist, to your practice, to try and find a way to make some meaning of the world around you and yourself. So that's what these are doing. And they do make some support, some understanding of my relationships with those families. I've shown my family, I've shown them to my brothers and had no response. My parents are dead, but no response whatsoever from them. So I don't know, what they would make of them. And they're incredibly personal. I mean, it's interesting, since I talked about sort of those two things, the internal and the external. These are really very internal drawings, but I needed also to show them, and I needed to show them in the PhD, and I needed to have some of them blown up really big on the wall, because I think they do have another interest as well beyond the story I'm telling you. Yeah, I'm not sure there's anything else I particularly...
Simon, can I ask you what sort of work were you doing before?
Well, no, that's a very good question. I now look back on all the work I've made pretty much as being kind of quite thin, really, over my career. Actually, it's one of those things that our daughter joked about after Scarlett died. You've got to be careful what you wish for. That you want something to add some content to your work. I don't think any of us wish to have this to have as our content for our work. But I do look back now on my work and think it was quite a lot of it was a bit of kind of art schooly wank, really, in a sense. It was just making art for art's sake, whereas now suddenly I was making work which had something really important to me. I will just put this other slide up because I can tell you the story actually, because you will all have remembered the Museum of Everything show at Mona, probably. This was the turning point for me because it was a year and a half into the PhD, and I went there with one of my colleagues from RMIT. And I think for everyone, it was a pretty intense show. I mean, it was pretty full on, but I remember I literally broke down in the middle of it, and I had to get out. I was crying and I had to leave. And for me, there was suddenly this moment that I was making work exactly the same as all the people in that show. Whereas we were going and looking at it thinking, oh, outsider art, this is interesting. I was doing that with my kind of art school head on, interesting genre. I came away thinking, hell, that's why I'm making my work. It's the same reason. And that was almost the first time in my life as an artist, I suddenly had a realization that this was something I absolutely had to do. And it was being driven by something beyond a kind of aesthetic desire to make something that would look good. This was something absolutely driving out of me and still is. And if I hadn't had it, I think I'd have been very screwed up. So, I suppose I'll finish by sort of saying that the reason I think I do this work and we do this work is because I think many people have losses and trauma and don't often have a creative outlet by which they can manage that. And I know I'm talking about therapists here, so please, I know you know this, but so I suppose the reason I've done this work over all these years with people is to give them a voice, to be able to express something which is so deeply in there that if you don't have a form by which you can channel this, then it just gets stuck. That's my feeling. And that was the worst thing. And Victoria's not going to talk about it, but she's written a book. Georgia wrote lots of songs after her sister died. We all found ways of channeling. It's not even channeling. It's actually surviving, isn't it? That's actually what it's about. It's a means of surviving. And this was mine. What I find interesting is I'm still doing it. I can't stop. I sit down, to answer that question, Karen, there's no kind of thing before that I want to go back to and think, oh, I must finish that idea I had. I haven't got that at all. This has just become completely all-encompassing. So I thought I'd share that because I think it was, you know, one of the themes of today to art purpose. So I might leave it there. Yeah. See if there's any.
Can I just also like to say, Simon, maybe show people the journals that you've got behind you. I was really lucky when, you know, all your printed books, when I stayed at your home, like you just have a mass of those printed books.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like they're sort of like journals too, aren't they?
Well, they are, yeah. And you can see these ones I've tagged according to, so all the brown ones I think were my brothers. My brothers are in all the brown ones. Yeah, I mean they're pretty. They did act as journals, so they're not dated specifically. But what the system I did was I would make 50 on the iPad. I'd export them to Photoshop. I'd send them off to the printer. So I didn't choose. I didn't select. You know, there are some in here I just think are terrible, but that didn't seem so important as, you know, some of them are pretty kind of. But, you know, I don't think that's a particularly interesting one, but I wanted to put it in anyway because I wanted to be able to come back and review the work at some point. So yes, there are lots, and they have morphed on, you know, I've become much better at the technique. This is using Procreate, which is amazing, you know, is a Hobart-based app. But when I first met them and told them I've been using it since 2011, he said, no, I don't think you can be. And I got out one of my books and showed him it was dated 2011. I mean, I have been using Procreate now for 9 years. It's incredible. It's been my main form of making. Just because for me, it was like, oh, thank God this was invented. I'm now able to do all these things that I've been wanting to do always. I mean, I'm a printmaker, so I've always worked in layers and colors and collaged elements. But this was just such an extremely quick way of being able to look, and there are loads of references in here, you know. My cultural history is in here. That's David Bowie's hair from The Man Who Fell to Earth. You know, that's me. So yeah. And
Simon.
Yeah.
Please, sorry. Is there any way that we can read your PhD?
Oh, you can, yeah.
How can we do that?
Yeah, I can share it. It's a public document at RMIT, but I'm happy to share it. It's a PDF, yeah. This work was 1/3 of the work. So this was 1/3 of the PhD. Another third was, as you know, 1/3 of it was this house and this project that we're in now around social practice, engaging with people. And the other third really was the public participatory work of those figures, which some of you have been engaged with, which of course are about broken wood being repaired with plaster. So, you know, I could have talked about those as being something around this work too. I mean, basically my work is just, yeah, everything is about this now. And I'm really proud of that, Karen, that actually I now look back and thank God I've got this now, because that's a terrible thing to say, but I'm actually making work with more quality, more content than I ever had before. Yeah. So yeah, there are lots of these, and yeah, lots.